Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. We're about to start the event. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this event, How a New African Strategy for Climate Action Can Make Agriculture and Food Systems Resilient. So this event is organized by AICCRA. AICCRA stands for Accelerating the Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa. And I'm very happy and at the same time excited of being today here facilitating this discussion, this conversation. So AICCRA has been working with the African Union for the past months in terms of putting together the African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan for the African continent for the following 10 years. So we are very happy to see that we are going to have a conversation about this strategy. What do we want to accomplish in this event in the following 90 minutes? So we want to explore the key strategies and the key pillars of this strategy, and perhaps understand how this strategy is going to help the continent to achieve sustainable, low emissions, and climate resilient food systems. It's very ambitious, but I think that we have the right strategy to follow that path. We also would like to engage in a conversation in relation to unpacking the elements for food systems transformation in Africa, and how this strategy can help us in order to do that, emphasizing the importance of partnerships in terms of implementing the African Union strategy. We also would like to discuss about the different roles that stakeholders can play in this systems level transformation and how they can be part of the implementation of this strategy. And also, we would like to use this opportunity to connect initiatives, programs, partnerships into what it is stated and framed in this strategy. So it's a very interesting agenda, the one that we have in front of us. We're going to have discussion of the panelists. We're going to have the chance to hear from you, from the audience, in relation to this strategy. So I'm very excited about what's to come. I would just like to emphasize that this strategy, I'm excited about it because it sets a bold agenda for climate action and food systems in Africa. It speaks about the importance of enhancing Africa's capacity to mobilize resources to implement technologies to build resilience in food systems. But it also speaks about the importance of strengthening the adaptive capacity of the communities that are already being affected by climate trends in the continent. Very, very important, it's a strategy that can help the continent to enhance inclusion, alignment, and cooperation between other initiatives that are happening in the different African countries. There's a lot of momentum right now in the continent to be able to contribute to building this resilience against climate. This strategy sets a framework for coordination in order to do this. Let me just finish this little introduction, but just mentioning that COP27, as we all know, is focused on implementation. And it's a major opportunity for Africa. I believe that we have the right tools, the right policies, started with this strategy that we are going to be presenting and discussing today to make sure that we are really moving one step farther in terms of implementation. So with that little introduction, let me start with the agenda. And the presentation of the strategy was going to be done by Harsen Niambi, who is Director for the Directorate of Sustainable Development and Blue Economy of the African Union Commission. He is attending the agenda of the commissioner, so he couldn't be with us. He was very much expecting to be here with us to present this strategy, but Romy Chevalier, and I want to use this opportunity to thank Romy and the AICCRA team for the great work that they have done in terms of providing inputs, evidence, and serving as engagers to make sure that this strategy had the right elements. So we have the opportunity to listen from Romy, that she has been working on this. She's a very appropriate person to tell us about the strategy, and she would provide an overview and introduction to the African Union climate strategy. Romy, the floor is yours.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good. Can you hear me properly? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to see you all here. And again, thank you for your time. We understand that there are many competing priorities and agendas at the COP, so we appreciate the time that you're giving us. Unfortunately, as Ana Maria has mentioned, Hassan Nyambe can't make this event, but in his absence, I just want to give a quick overview of the strategy so that we're all on the same page. The strategy is an official document. It was launched by the heads of state of all 55 member countries of the African Union in February this year. Not many people are aware of it. So this is obviously COP27. We are using it as a dissemination platform to kind of show and highlight some of the key messages that the strategy contains. The strategy is found online. It was launched by the Kenyan presidency, who's chairing the Kakhosokh aspect of the negotiations, launched by the Kenyans in June this year. So you will find it on the African Union website. If you Google the full name, you'll find it. It's a huge document, so I'm not going to try and do justice to it here. I think the document is 140 pages, of which obviously there's a lot of context, background, and some priority areas and action points. So what I'm going to do is give a few little brief slides on what the strategy contains so that we're on the same page. And then the rest of the discussion will be around different role players and the importance of different actors and their towards implementation of the strategy. So the idea is that we have the strategy and it's on paper, and as we all know, many African policies are well written, but they lack implementation. So the idea is to look at partnerships and coordination around the implementation of the strategy. Next slide, please. So just that you were aware, the strategy it was implemented in 2022 and is a 10-year document. So it goes until 2032, and the document will be reviewed after 5 years. So it was in terms of putting it together, was a very consultative process. There were many actors that were involved in the development of the document. So if you go onto the document website, you'll see who was involved and the different validation processes and contributions. Hello, Mishi. Right, so just to let you know that this is actually the first official climate change strategy for the continent. So there was a mandate back in 2009 where the African Union Commission were mandated to write a draft, a coordinated common response to climate change for the continent. But unfortunately, to many reasons, this document was never forthcoming. We then had a draft in 2014, which was unfortunately never adopted. So this is quite a significant milestone for the continent. It's the continent of Africa's first climate change strategy and action plan. So I think it is very important that these conversations continue, and so that there's a lot of emphasis and harmonization around all our actions. So essentially what this strategy does, it provides an outline for harmonized and coordinated actions to respond to the impacts of climate change, thereby supporting planning for Africa's low-carbon future. And just to emphasize that the strategy looks at all aspects of climate change, from resilience building and adaptation all the way through to low-carbon development futures. Thank you. The strategy ensures that institutions, strategies, and decisions for climate risk management and climate resilient development are integrated and implemented as central to achieving the continent's development objectives, as we know from the Agenda 26 of the African Union, as well as the United Nations Strategic Development Goals. So throughout the document, you will see reference to harmonization and alignment with global frameworks and processes, and regional frameworks and processes. But also, please, just to note that This is not a legally binding document. The onus falls on member countries for implementation. So I think it's very important. This is a guideline. It essentially sets out the priority actions for 10 years for the continent. All member countries have adopted the strategy. So in essence, it should act as a coordinating framework, but the onus falls on member countries for implementation. Next, please. The process of the strategy underwent quite a lot of validation around the mission, the objectives, the goals, etc. But the actual overall vision for the strategy states a sustainable, prosperous, equitable, and climate-resilient African continent by 2063. By 2063, aligned with the Agenda 2063. Next. The goal of the strategy is to provide a continental framework for collective action and enhanced cooperation in addressing climate change issues that improve local livelihoods and well-being, promote adaptive capacity, and achieve low-carbon, sustainable economic growth that contributes fairly towards preserving a global good. Next, please. The strategy has a few sub-objectives. The main objective is building resilience of Africa to withstand impacts of climate change through promoting climate-resilient development. And the sub-objectives include reducing the vulnerability of affected communities to manage climate change risk, pursuing equitable and transformative low-carbon resilient development pathways. And I'm going to go into the pathways discussion now because I think that's a very important one for partnership development. Enhancing the capacity to mobilize resources and access to technology for ambitious climate action, and enhancing inclusion, alignment, and ownership of climate strategies and plans across the spheres of government and stakeholder groupings. And as I mentioned, the strategy tries, in essence, to be as inclusive as possible. Thanks. Next. So this is, I think, important. The strategy is has 4 strategic axes areas. Axis 1 is around policy and governance, and I'm not going to go into each of them now because we're going to be speaking about the food and agricultural aspects of the strategies, but please, I implore you to please have a look at some of these aspects as it piques your interest. But there is a large and substantive conversation in the strategy around policy and governance and key action areas that the continent wants to pursue. Axis 2 is interesting. It's 9 pathways towards transformative action. So one of those, you'll see number 1 is food systems under changing climate, which we're here to discuss today. But obviously, with the cross-cutting nature of a strategy like this, and obviously, protecting land systems, for example, is number 2. Energy infrastructure systems, for example, is number 3. Promoting low-carbon, resilient mobility and transport systems. All of these are important for our conversation today. Inclusive, resource-efficient industrialization. There's a pathway around urban cities. You can't see it. Number 7 is water systems, a resilient blue economy, and 9 is digital transformation. So the strategy speaks very specifically about these pathways and actions that are needed in each of the pathways to promote resilient and transformative development. Then, so going back to Axis 3, it's enhancing implementation, and we know that this is obviously key for the implementation of all actions, climate-related actions. So there's a conversation around mobilizing finance, technology, capacity building, and many other aspects under Axis 3. And then Axis 4 is leveraging regional flagship initiatives to essentially say what exists already, so that we're not obviously duplicating work, but trying to align. So look at what we've already committed to, look at some of the actions under those initiatives, and trying to align this strategy with existing initiatives at various levels, including, and I must emphasize, countries' nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. Thank you. Okay, so before we go into the panel, essentially is to talk about partnerships. So without which this strategy is obviously not going to be implemented. The onus, as I mentioned, does not only sit with the African Union Commission that has developed the strategy in conjunction with many partners. It requires partnerships in order to see the strategy through to implementation. So partnerships will be key to effective implementation of the strategy. Member states, development partners, civil society, the private sector, and other stakeholders all have a role to play in the operationalization of the strategy, including the provision of technical and financial support. And I think at the moment, in terms of where the African Union are at, is they're initiating conversations around how to operationalize the strategy. There's conversations around monitoring and evaluation, accountability frameworks, conversations around partnership development, how to engage civil society, what are the platforms for engagement. There's conversations about roadmaps and all sorts of other things, finances. So what is great to know is that there's a lot of emphasis around the implementing that strategy. And just to say, collectively, we can achieve immense impact through the co-design and the joint implementation of projects and initiatives to support the strategy's objectives. So that's, I think, a good way to stop there and to say thank you for coming. It's really great to know that all of us have a part to play in the implementation of this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Romy, for that. That was excellent as an introduction in terms of really understanding this strategy, where we are in relation to the strategy, and I really like the emphasis on partnerships for implementation. So if I understand correctly, this is the time. We have the framework. With that framework, we can engage in partnerships with a variety of stakeholders to make sure that we are going from the phase of writing the strategy to the implementation of the objectives that are in there. So that was great. And it's going to be really useful for the panel in terms of the discussion that we are going to have now. So we have a fantastic panel right now with us, and we are going to be using Romy's remarks to address some questions in relation to the potential of this strategy. So let me start by introducing all the panelists, and then I'll go into the questions. So we have here to my left, Mwana Hamisi Singano. She's Global Policy Lead at the Women's Environmental Development Organization. Thank you very much for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you in the panel. Then, going to the left, we have Esther Sulu. We are totally honored to have you in the panel, Esther. She is the committee chair lady for the Chiteteso Farmer Federation in Zambia, and she is working closely with AICCRA in the implementation of our activities. So it's a total pleasure to be able to hear your voice in this panel. Then we have Caroline Monguera. I know Caroline very well because she works with me. Caroline is the Global Lead for Policies and Institutions for Climate Action at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR, but Caroline also leads one of the themes on climate smart agriculture in AICCRA. And then we have Jabri Ibrahim. He's the Youth Engagement Manager for Africa for the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions. So as you can see, we have a brilliant set of panelists to start this discussion in relation to this strategy. So let me start with a question for all of you, just to start warming up on what we are going to be discussing. So first question. You just heard Romy, you heard what the strategy is about. So I want to ask if what you've heard and you know about the strategy, do you believe that this strategy could be or it's already a game changer for climate action in Africa? So let's start with you, Mwana Hamisi.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Possibly I'll be a little bit biased because in one way or the other, I've been involved in the review process of the strategy. So I think part of the inputs that were provided during the review process before it was adopted, and now I'm also part of the sort of like a group who is looking at how the strategy can be implemented. So I do strongly feel that the strategies that the continent needed for so long, and it has been said it took forever because I think most of the member states didn't want just to have a piece of paper in the name of strategy. Like everyone was so invested on what this strategy can deliver, what we want. And as we all know, the continent is so diverse. There's different need, aspiration, and an ambition. And if you want to have something concrete, then you should expect length, conversation, discussions, and negotiation. And that's why it took a lot of time to develop it. But I think if all of us in our collectiveness embrace what is in the strategy, definitely it will be a game changer. And specifically when it comes to food security, as it's stipulated in the strategy, I think is the central of the strategy itself. And yeah, I think it will change if and only if all of us will own it, will put resources to it, and all of us will implement in it our diverse way. The strategy, what is also unique is the strategy is not only for government, it's also for civil society, it's also for private sector, it's for everyone. It's just give us a framework on what do we want to achieve and the strategy on how to get there, and call all of us to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I love what you said in terms of the ownership. So if this is not owned, then it's just a piece of paper, no? Okay, that was great. Esther, same question for you. Do you believe that this strategy is a game changer for climate action in Africa?
I think if we all put one, I think this will work. Yeah, if we put all our minds together and work on one goal, I think this will work to be implemented.
Perfect, so partnerships, no? Emphasizing the importance of the partnerships. Caroline, is this a game changer for climate action in Africa?
So for me, it's very exciting. It's very exciting because we've been speaking about integration in Africa. We have the African Free Trade Area. So for me, what was very exciting is to see one strategy for Africa. And so working on the areas of agriculture and climate change, it was exciting to see that we are starting to have one voice on this aspect. And what secondly was very exciting for me, through this initiative, is also to start to see that it's just not a strategy, but also looking at the action. So, because if you look at the whole policy process in Africa, for instance, we have seen a lot of efforts to develop policy documents, but the action plan helps us to translate that into high impact investment and delivery plans, because that's what we are always missing. If you look at the countries that have developed NDCs, what is always missing is how that is translated into an investment and delivery plan. So I think for me, it's really exciting to see Africa come up with this document. And it's also exciting to see that as one Africa, you know, the main challenge we are talking about now is we want to look at transboundary issues, you know. When we look at, for instance, the Karamoja cluster, where we have climate security risks, we have migration, conflict. It cuts across Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, South Sudan. So this helps us to have one strategy that we can always say we are implementing those transboundary issues. So I think it's also an anchor for us to start to solve those issues that cut across geographies here.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline. So having one voice, I get from you, or having one voice from Africa, and then being able to translate this into investments. Very, very good. Jabri, is this a game changer strategy for climate action in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna, for inviting us for the panel. And I just quickly mention, I want to thank the African Union Commission and Romy Lea for inviting young Africans to contribute to this strategy. If you go to the last page, there's a lot of young Africans being cited for their substantive input into this process. And I think the only reason we're even discussing implementation is because we have a strategy in place. So it plays that key role. For me, I think especially when, not only in this strategy, but in the following processes, when we put youth engagement clauses into the CAHOSC decisions, that is a lobbying tool that you can then approach your governments, your national governments, that the onus is on them, that this has been agreed, it's been adopted by the heads of state, and now we can then advance our agendas back in our home countries.
Thank you very much. That was great. And I really enjoy seeing the role of the youth in terms of putting together the strategy. Really, really good way to go. So thank you for that first question. I'm going to go into more specificities in relation to the strategy. And this question is for Mwana Hamisi. How can you see this strategy addressing critical issues in relation to gender and social inclusion in Africa?
Hello. Okay. Thank you. I think first, the strategy itself, women make more than half of the people in the continent. Of course, with all the realities on their position in the society, the engagement in the police processes. But I think first it's important to look on the choices of the intervention area as the whole, because if the strategy, and I'm hoping it will be fully implemented, so everything that has been outlined in the strategy ought to benefit women because they make the half of the population. But also specifically, the strategy has a chapter on inclusion, which has outlined the specific challenges which specific challenges and realities, but also potential of having an intentional understanding, but also having an intentional and deliberate strategies to engage women and to address gender issue as we implement strategy. And specifically, when you look, for example, on the food security, as the way it has been articulated in the strategy, we all know women, African women, make the majority of the food producers. So the choices of intervention itself, we are hoping those choices of intervention will really transform lives of the women who have been food producers, because for so long in most of our country, for example, investment in agriculture always go to the cashew crop agriculture. So we have boards for cashew nuts, we have boards for cotton, we have investment, we have policy position for this, but we don't have board for cabbages and potatoes, etc. Because always those food crops are seen as non-value crops. They are seen as to operate only for domestic purposes because they are not exported, they don't attract hard currency, then the investment doesn't go. So the articulation on how we will build food system in a way that the benefit of the food system will be shared, because to date, those who benefit from the food system are the middlemen and large-scale traders and large-scale producers, but not the women who make the majority. So we are really excited to see that the strategy has committed to change the food system, to empower those who produce system and bridge the gap between the small food producers and the big food producers, and create a system in which benefit will be shared. And I think that self will transform millions of lives of the women who depend on food production as their source means of livelihood.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mwana Hamisi. And it's really nice to see that it's so high in the agenda, the topic, that there's a whole chapter on inclusion. I think that that's the way to go. we were engaged in a panel in an event this morning here in the same room, and we're talking about transformative adaptation. And some of the consensus was that if we don't take seriously these issues in relation to inclusion, equity, then we're never going to be able to engage in this transformative adaptation that it's benefiting all. So thank you very much for that, and very important to highlight that there's a whole chapter that deals with this in this strategy. Esther, I'm going to go with you, and I want to really take opportunity of having you with us in this panel, and get from your experience, what do you think that farmers, the association that you work with, that should be doing more to make sure that the technologies that are already there, that are helping to adapt to climate change and to build resilience, reach farmers, your community, your neighbors? What can you do more to make sure that that is happening, that you are benefiting from those technologies?
The first thing we should do is to engage farmers, and educate them on climate smart agriculture, including women, youths, and not forgetting people who are living with disabilities. The other thing we should do is to educate trainer of trainers within our farmers who take the lead on training fellow local farmers and link them to the market linkages. I think those things will help us to sort out this strategy we are talking about.
Thank you very much for that. So, trainers of trainers, I think that that's a very clever way of getting the most of communities that are already working with these innovations and benefiting from them, and then telling their neighbors how they can also benefit from that. So thank you for that, Esther. So Caroline, in your different roles, you engage with both public and private institutions. Do you think that these institutions in Africa have the capacity to deliver based on this strategy? Are these institutions ready for this?
So I'm going to be, I would want to say in terms of like the gender and social inclusion, I think I have measured expectations. And this is informed by some of the work that we were evaluating, like for instance, all the NDCs that have been submitted. And what you see is that nearly 90% of those NDCs already have gender considerations. But when you go down to the level of the communities, you don't see those outcomes. So for me, I think just having women mentioned, it's a good consideration. It's good to see this in policy documents. What I think is measured for me in my expectation is the capacity to do impactful gender and social inclusion, you know? How are we looking at, for instance, the root causes of that vulnerability? I have been criticizing some of the national partners we work with because we are very excited about this mobile phone in Africa. I mean, it's really exciting. We have mobile phones. We are delivering climate information services, climate smart agriculture through mobile phones. But we are also leaving the most vulnerable communities. We are leaving the women out. We are leaving people in dry lands who have low literacy levels. So if we are running ahead in terms of one of the, I think it was the 9th action point on digital transformation, where we are looking at digital transformation from a mobile phone as a forefront measure. So I think we really need to ask ourselves, and working with institutions like in AICCRA, what we are really looking at, what are those solutions in terms of technologies, in terms of delivery mechanisms, in terms of how we are doing the technology transfer but taking that lens of asking ourselves, what is really the gender and social inclusion approach? You know, so it's not just having that consideration, but meaningfully looking at an approach to transfer resilience to farmers, to communities, to private sector, and through private sector as well in terms of investment solutions. So that is what I think is really missing. And for me, I think that's where we really need to put a lot of emphasis so that we can make sure we have everybody on board in that process of transformation.
So, Caroline, and let me take the liberty to ask you some follow-up questions because I work directly with you in AICCRA, so I guess that I can. And it's, you're a scientist, no? How do you think that evidence can guide the implementation of this strategy? How are we going to be working and contributing from our side as researchers to make sure that evidence in what works and what doesn't work, it's guiding the implementation of this strategy?
So evidence that we can provide as scientists is evidence on what solutions work and what is the impact of those solutions. So that's what I think we can provide as the evidence. You know, it's just not about solutions, but science is bringing piloted, validated information. So for me, I see that's a value I bring as a researcher because we are faulted for being people who spend a lot of time doing research, but that's the value of our research. It's to validate those solutions and to present something that is piloted and validated. So when we do our small experiments, they're not, people criticize them to be small. We don't want to see plot-size experiments, but the plots that we are doing is for the basis of that validation, yeah.
So we have a role to play. Good. So Jeffrey, very important, you are representing the youth in this panel. So we know that Africa's young population is growing, is booming, and will continue to grow in the coming decades. What are the challenges and the opportunities that these present in relation to this, the implementation of this strategy, and in general, in terms of climate action? What's the role of youth in terms of making this a reality?
Yeah, thank you so much. Since I'm representing so many young people, I'm going to refer to my notes because I can't get this wrong. But maybe if we zoom out a bit, if you think about climate action, like the visual part, you think about these big names, Vanessa Nakate, Elizabeth Wathuti. You think about African Union Youth Envoys, Aya Shebi, the current one, Chido. So a clear role that young people in holding power, especially. Sorry, just saying that there's a clear role that young people, not that they can't play, but they already play in holding power to account in the continent. It's not always easy, especially when we leave this international arena and we go back to our home countries and you knock on the door of the minister. They almost always don't answer these doors. But maybe just to also put it in perspective, Africa's this booming population you're mentioning, it's an opportunity because first of all, maybe also to mention a point. By 2050, quarter of the global population will be Africans. So if we're in a net zero resilient world by 2050, a quarter of the human population will be African. And then also, young people are Africa's most kind of abundant resource. You think about the globe at 2050, then this is also the globe's most abundant resource. So I want to also mention a few things. So young people can be put to work to address the externalities of climate change, rewilding natural ecosystems. But this, if we do put this structure in place, and North American politicians have been talking about a climate core, but it has to be structured in a way that it's equitable, and young people have to be paid fair wages so they can live a dignified life. And a lot of us, and me, I have done so many years of unpaid work before. I'm in my current position. So I fully understand the challenges of, especially in the nonprofit sector, and addressing these global concerns, how to merge your expertise with the challenges. But also you had mentioned about challenges, but I don't think there's I don't think there's much challenge in involving young people in climate action. I think it's a challenge for, oil and gas profiteers. If young people are part of this conversation, it's a challenge for climate deniers, because young people have a clear sense of the urgency. And also, we are at COP27. A lot of young people are experts here. We're not just the young people, but we are experts. I'm also in the energy sector. And if anyone in the audience can look at the left, there's a youth and children pavilion right here. It's the first time young people have been able to catalyze real investment in the blue zone. And it's completely crowded. There was a head of state immediately before this. But we also have a global youth statement. The official UNFCCC Youth Constituency Yango has an official position for COP27. This is the offer of the young people, and it feeds into the negotiation tracks. So there's young people. Every year we get more young people in delegation, and it's not because our national governments it has occurred to them that, oh yes, we need more young people in the delegation. There's a lot of pressure being put on them. And then also, I love that we're talking about implementation. There's a campaign called the Africa Youth Mobilization for COP campaign, and it has a climate action plan. That climate action plan is not about demands. It's about a clear sense of how young Africans can be get meaningful employment, green jobs, to implement strategies like this. If our government should see that this is a valuable document, I hope they do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jarvi. So you emphasize the importance of decent wages and employment for youth, and I think that that's very important. And I'm really happy to see all the momentum that you are having in terms of making these decisions. So I think that we are at a point in relation to climate action that is not just to hear from what youth people are saying, but it's just they have to become part of the decisions, not as an outsider, but in the center of it. So I think that that's really, really important. Thanks for those thoughts. So Esther, let me move to you. We said that one of the things that this strategy aims to achieve is to mobilize resources for implementing these things. I want to ask to you, how can, in general, businesses, international, national businesses, and investors, how can they help farmers to adopt, for example, climate-smart agriculture? What are the opportunities in there?
In the first instance, farmers need better information about the seasonal climate. So when we are even the focus, to inform our local contexts how we can better adapt to the climate vagaries in short and mid-term. And if we can see plants, trees, and animals to keep, and how we can go with them, especially what market linkages are therefore needed. The useful are current information systems which are missing now. So by the help of giving the farmers more information on climate-smart agriculture and climate information through the trainers I've already talked about, who are our local farmers, Africa has a varsity land which is not handled properly, if we see. As investors comes to listen to farmers and support the activities which we do on the ground, and I think this will support our strategy because Africa is our land. The other thing is we should work in partnership with local business enterprises to uplift and build better Africa for us to improve our livelihood and to fight for this strategy we are talking about.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther. So partnerships with local businesses and enterprises that can contribute to get farmers closer to these type of technologies. That was very clear. So let me ask a question for the panel. So Whoever wants to respond to this, feel free to jump in. And you already provided some hints in relation to this, but I want to get answers from you. So we have this strategy. We have heard from Romy how ambitious this strategy is. But from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge that Africa is going to face over the coming decade that can somehow hinder the continent's ambitions to implement this and to address climate change? And focus on that biggest one. What's the biggest challenge that you see in the continent that can get us away from this agenda? So Caroline, go ahead.
So what's happening now in Africa, and specifically what you're going to see a lot in the news, is that the rates at which climate change is impacting Africa is outpacing our ability to be able to cope, to adapt to the risks that we are facing. So it's for me as an African, I think I want to say that it's embarrassing for us to talk about drought every year. We are in the news talking about drought, our animals are dying, our elephants are dying. I think we had last week in my country, Kenya, 11 elephants dying. It's not new. Next year we are going to tell you about elephants dying. It's something we tell you year in, year out. So our responses have been more donor-driven, but we need to see that the pace at which climate impacts are affecting our continent, we need nationally led responses. We have to act, we have to prepare, we have to build resilient systems. So I think response is not gonna work. Our leaders need to look at it from that point of view. We need to act for resilience and long-term resilience. So I think that's what I see as the biggest challenge. Dependency on international funding. We should focus on domestic resources. So one other thing, the second one I would want to emphasize on this point. So about a month ago, we were preparing for the COP, and we had the African group of negotiators, expert support teams sit down to prepare for this COP. So we had a week of intensive discussions. And so we come to the COP with one message: we need more financing. But when we were putting ourselves to task, we asked ourselves, can we define where this financing is going to go? Can we define where we want the impact of that financing to go? Can we define what's a resource mobilization approach? It's not just GCF. So how much do you want to come from GCF? How much do you want to come from the World Bank Trust? How much do you want to come from philanthropy, from private sector? Let's be very specific. And can we define how we want to be able to measure and track and be accountable for that? So we don't have that. We only have, we want to double our adaptation financing by 2025. But we have to be very, very specific. If we are very specific, then we know that if we don't get our ask, we can resource internally or other ways. So for me, I think I want to criticize my continent, because I'm from that continent, and say that we need to take on this as our own challenge and really, really, really get running, because it's impacting us in a very detrimental way. Yeah.
So thank you for that, Caroline. I really enjoy listening to you. And the reason of this is because what I have learned from the implementation of AICCRA is that really in Africa, the way to go for the CGIAR, for us as scientists, is to strengthening regional and national African organizations. Otherwise, I don't think that this is going to work. And I'm reading this very similar to what you just mentioned, in the sense that we can implement our projects, we can implement activities on the ground. But if the national and regional African organizations are not being empowered, if the capacity is not there, we are never going to be able to address what it's envisioned in this strategy. So thank you very much for that. That was great. Yeah, Jarvis, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna Maria. I just wanted to re-emphasize Caroline's point. I think it's a very important point. I think for this strategy to be implemented, it needs real financing. It needs real investment, because it requires a transition, and a transition that is cross-sectoral, not just a just energy transition, but a just food systems transition, etc. And that, two of my colleagues, UN Economic Commission from Africa, when they hear people push Africa to leapfrog, they always say, do we know where this frog is landing, you know? Do we know where this frog that is leapfrogging will land? This means that any transition that Africa, because there's a developmental pathway, people are getting power, people are getting food. If there's a transition, a disruption in that system, or in that process, it needs to be just, but also finance, a managed transition, because Africa can't take a risk on developing its peoples. So I just wanted to mention that, but also Caroline wants to hold the continent accountable. So we do require political courage in those member states, that every country has to go and read this strategy and determine, is it fit for purpose in my country, and then take action at the national level. So it's both the international community, but also Africa for Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Fit for purpose. Any other reactions from the panelists on this one? No? No?
I think, so firstly, before the challenge, I think as I was listening to Caroline and what you're saying in terms of we want money for what, right? And what comes to my mind is to implement the strategy. Because if you look at the strategy, it's really outlined the whole system shift. And to your question is where the frog is landing. The strategy is already outlined where the frog had to land, right? Because it really spoke on how we need to change our cities, how we need to change our transport systems, how do we change our energy, water, like all the 12 critical areas, urban, how is urban engaged, how transport needs to be engaged. So it's the whole livelihood system, cities, governance, like everything is there. It's like system-wide approach. And to me, I think that is where the challenge is, because you cannot implement this strategy by, you cannot implement it from climate finance, because it needs digital finance. It needs city resilience finance. It needs infrastructure finance. So it needs a lot of finance from different, because we are changing the entire Africa to be resilient to the reality of climate change. And I think, to me, and when we are having conversations, we really also challenge ourselves that possibly this is not the conversation that needs to be done by only climate change activists. So we were in a meeting and thinking, possibly we need to have architectures in the room to start now imagining how the new Africa housing should look like. We need to have road engineers in the room, because now our road construction is copy and paste from the global north, right? Are these resilient to our systems, to our reality, to our needs? So possibly we need to have road engineer now starting thinking, what would road infrastructure in Africa look like in the context of climate change? And the strategy has outlined all that. So to me, I think the biggest challenge is that the strategy is all-inclusive, and because it's all-inclusive, it's need everyone to implement it. And I'm not sure if our system has been set to bring everyone to do all the pieces. So in terms of the coordination, it can be challenging, but also it can be challenging can be challenging for us to work with a non-traditional partner, because we feel that And then we have architects and engineers and traders, everybody doing their thing. So bringing them together to implement this strategy, I think that will be challenging. But I think it's the challenge that if there is a need, if there is that political currents, we can address that challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. I think that you went right to the point. And this is very much related to the silos, no? It's very, very hard to get action in this systems-wide approach. And I think that part of that is because we are very much educated to think in boxes. So we are in this box in terms of disciplines, in terms of ministries, and getting away from those boxes and really being able to understand how to connect, it's hard. So I think that that's a very important point, and it's going to be critical for the implementation of this strategy. So thank you very much for those thoughts. Esther, I want to do a reality check with you right now. And please be honest. I want a super honest answer. Do you feel that policymakers listen to you? Where are we there? And how we better connect farmers like you and the ones that you work with to the people who make decisions that affect your life? So is there a gap? Are you being listened by policymakers? Can we do it better?
Just to be frank, policymakers in most cases do ignore farmers, and our voice is ignored. So now, it is a privilege to attend this COP27 so that I can speak out for my fellow farmers whom I have left behind, that all levels, government, African Union, United Nations, need to listen to the farmers to make the strategy work. I also appeal to policymakers to work with people who are organized. Like in my case, where I come from, we are very much organized, but we are failing to work with people, with policymakers, because most of the time they ignore what we do. What I mean by being organized, we have brought up cooperatives in various areas to come with one goal of conserving the natural resources and adapt smart climate agriculture. So if policymakers work with people like us who are organized, I think this strategy will work well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your honesty. So, Reese, policymakers are ignoring farmers. I think key message, no? We need to do a better job in terms of connecting. And then Esther said something that is really important, it's association. And I know that there's a lot of that in Africa in terms of farmers getting together, and that's really useful in terms of getting your voice heard and making sure that you are negotiating in equal terms. So, so aggregation, I think that it is very important, and organization, I think that it's important as well. So Jabri, let me go to you, because you said that you were very interested about sustainable energy solutions in the agricultural sector. And we mentioned that one of the key and interesting things of this strategy is this systems-wide approach. And talking about energy, Romy mentioned that was one of the pillars, pathways. So what sustainable energy solutions do African farmers need to help them become more resilient and climate smart?
Yeah, thank you so much. Is it axis, the many axes in the strategy? But no, I really like the strategy because it goes sector by sector. Climate change is not a sector. We don't have a Ministry of Climate. So it's really important that when we decarbonize, when we build resilience, you go sector by sector. It really brings this conversation into perspective. Otherwise, it's very an abstract notion of rising emissions. So within kind of the energy sector or the axis in the strategy, I think when it pertains to food systems, I think it's important that we solarize smallholder farmers. You can via decentralized grids, etc., build cold storage. When you power farms, when you give farms energy access, electrify farms, it creates yield, it builds yield, increases yield, but also it reduces food waste. All these metrics I'm talking about, at the end of the day, it builds wealth. And when you build wealth in a community and you build wealth with smallholder farmers, you build resilience. Because when people quantify resilience, they talk about wealth factors. So if you're talking about the resilience of smallholder farmers and how that the energy, solarizing them, building cold storage, etc., it can build resilience in that sense. But also food and agriculture sector, that it emits a huge, significant amount of methane. And methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. It's 20 times more potent than CO2. And it comes from the food and ag sector. So we need also to have that discussion more. At COP26, there was an entire methane pavilion where they had 14 days of discussions around methane. So you can imagine the kind of significance it has. So also, the last thing I just want to mention really quickly is food sovereignty. When Africa, it's a very important thing that Africa plants and feeds itself and has that food sovereignty. But that also goes back to farms that are high yielding, sustainable, etc. And the only way, in kind of my perspective of attaining that position where we are food sovereign is if we have high yielding, empowered, not powered farms across the continent. And it's smallholder farmers, so it has to be a decentralized, solar powered food system sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So you emphasize the importance of increasing productivity. If we want to talk about food sovereignty, we need to increase productivity. We need to address the yield gap that we are observing in many crops. So that's important, and we need to figure out how to do it and how to do it fast. Good. So I'm going to move into the audience. We have around 20 minutes or 15 minutes to make good use of our panelists. So you have heard the introduction of the strategy. You have heard some thoughts from them. So now is your opportunity to ask things to the panelists in relation to how this strategy can help to do a better job in terms of being prepared for climate threats in Africa. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Daibon Chibonga. I'm from Africa, southern part of Africa, Malawi to be specific, representing the farmers' constituency. One of the things that we are very unhappy about is that talks like these most often emphasize agriculture as the problem in climate change and not enough about it being a solution for climate change. Has the strategy been able to address that issue? Thank you.
And Romy, if you want to sit here, because... Okay, so agriculture not being the problem, but the solution. Any thoughts in relation to that?
Gosh, now you're testing my memory. There's so many different components of the strategy and so many action points. It does. I mean, I can't tell you exactly what the is, but the idea was to say, okay, well, these are the challenges, but there's an entire section on opportunities to say, how are we engaging people that are resources for the continent? How are we engaging youth as resources for the continent, as advocates of change? Say, well, there's a human resources, all of those technical things that are on the continent. How are we developing them and using them so that the continent can develop. So I can't speak exactly to what the wording is. I can't remember now, but essentially you're right, and it does try and to turn it on its head and say, how do we use the resources that we have to develop.
Any other thoughts from the panel in relation to that one? No? Fine.
Sorry, I came late, and so I see all the pillars of the strategy. But I think maybe one offers to agriculture as a solution. I think it's the more effective we can use our land, and then the less to expand the cultivation area, right? So that's the concept, the carbon sink, the maintaining the carbon sink, expanding even the carbon sink, and of course there's a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture and the soil carbon aspect of that, right? But actually that is lead to also a question to me, especially I really love to hear from the farmer's perspective, right? Because there's a lot of I feel a bit of preaching about what does it mean generative agriculture means, so I'm just curious from where you are sitting, what is your in terms of what does it mean for you and how does it work for you, right? Regenerative agriculture on the ground.
How we work on the ground, I think sometimes it's difficult for a farmer to understand very well, because mostly farmers just plan on their own without the concept of the policymakers or the government institutions. When a farmer plans for a little land which he has or have, that comes to work just a little on him or her. So we need more support from policymakers, as I've said already, and the government, so that we can fully implement and find the solution to what we want to achieve.
Go ahead, Caroline.
So let me also react to that based on the experience working on the ground with farmers. And also this is a conversation that's also reflected by policymakers, that science should be careful about the terminologies. Because there's no time a farmer sits like Esther and says, I'm practicing regenerative agriculture. Tomorrow I'm practicing agroecology. The next day I'm practicing. So it becomes totally confusing. And the African group of negotiators' position is that they are not going to introduce technical terminology in the submission documents. Because they say the pace at which we technical people are changing our own terminology, they cannot keep with that. So they want us to frame in the same way the strategy is saying, what are our climate change resilient solutions? So let's not label them, because those labels become appropriated, institutionalized. Then you have a terminology associated with some side. It brings some controversy, political issues. And the farmers on the ground really care about adaptive, transformative solutions without calling them by any appropriation.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of Laura, that is sitting in the front line of the room, and she leads all the work on policies and institutions in AICCRA. And she says many times, policymakers are just tired of hearing new definitions, new terminologies, new words that they don't really understand. And if they don't, it's hard to go from having that concept and implementing it through a policy. And I mean, if I try to put myself in that situation, it's hard. I mean, I have to make many decisions, I have to prioritize, and on top of that, you are coming with all new terms, which in many cases is the same thing that farmers have been doing for the past 10, 20, 40 years. So I think that that's a very valid point, Caroline. Thank you for raising that. Yeah?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Renata Rek. I'm South African, and I am living in Swaziland, now called the Kingdom of Eswatini. I'm Eco-Village Ambassador for Gen Africa, Global Eco-Village Network. perhaps you know a little bit about the background of our eco-village, but right now I'm on a project of coffee and cocoa in Africa. As you know, organic food is less than 1% of the world market. Both the America North and Europe has got more than 40-something%, and the rest of us, Asia and Africa, are less than 1% of the organic market. So, hello. What I want to address is the elephant in the room, and I've got written the elephants' names down. Because these elephants are actually the ones we are supposed to be speaking to, and they have not been addressed. So, regarding Coca-Cola, Associated British Foods, Danone, General Mills, Kellogg's, Mars, Mondelez, Nestle, PepsiCo, Unilever. We haven't spoken about why none of them have committed to pay the farmers a fair price. Not one of them have developed policies to help farmers in their supply chains. All of these companies have said they're going to have emissions, but none of them have broken it down. None of them have publicly recognized that water is a human right and have committed to consult local communities. And all of them have failed to put any policies in place about the local water policies. They are all secretive about their agricultural supply chains. They have, all of them have no policy against land grabs in their supply chains, and none of them have any policies enact, and none of them have committed to women and the discrimination in their supply chains. I would like to know what the scientists and policy makers are doing to address these elephants. But what are we doing about these elephants? What are we doing? Because the governments love us, the farmers will survive, but us middle class, we will be eliminated if we do not address these issues. Thank you very much.
So let me ask you something, because we are all participating here. Do you see a role to address those elephants through the implementation of this strategy?
Indeed, because how else are we going to address these strategies? Those are the ones that are in control of the food supply chain, and we're just pointing at the little farmer down on the ground as though he's got something to do with it. He will survive, we won't, because it won't be passed on to us. It's these 10 elephants that are not helping.
Any thoughts in relation to that comment from the panel? Thank you, Caroline.
Okay, so my personal reflection on that, what we as researchers and scientists also try to do is to really look at solutions in terms of unpacking nature positive, sustainable, resilient, inclusive solutions. And so when we do that, we are providing information, but there's a gap, which I believe maybe your organization could be, and others might be able to support in that question you're asking, the role of advocacy. You know, I believe those solutions in terms of what you're pointing, it's not a problem of a company. Could be what you're talking about is around how we produce our food. That's what you point to. And the costs in terms of the environmental footprint for that production. And it doesn't just stop at the big brands, you know? So if we have to be very open and criticize ourselves also, even in our own smallholder farms, we have over 30% waste. We are also part of the problem. So I think we need to call ourselves out as a constituency of the world population and say, let's all put ourselves at the front, because we are contributors, we are part of the problem and part of the solution. So my personal view is that when we look at the food systems as a scientist and we unpack where we find opportunities for us to undo, it stems from local production systems, from your commercialized part of the value chains, from the transportation. It's across so many elements in the food system. So let's all call ourselves out to say what's the impact we can make. So I don't say that what you're saying is we don't look at those institutions in terms of water use, efficiency, and energy efficiency, carbon emissions, but let's not also forget it's happening everywhere in the food system. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, first thank Caroline for those remarks. I completely align with your intervention. And maybe just before I address you, a quick comment from the lady who talked about regenerative agriculture. I think a lot of these terms and phrases, I'm just not sure how much they matter. When you ask a farmer, is your smallholder farm regenerative? Are you practicing climate smart agriculture? My co-panelists are laughing because at the end there's a disconnect. It matters to maybe a lot of us in the room, but it really doesn't trickle down. What matters is yield, productivity, food waste, And to your question about do conglomerates, are they bad faith actors? I mean, historically speaking, that's why we require, this is a Northern Star, and that's why we require policymakers to create regulations. You can't expect them to opt into committing that water is a human right. They'll never do it because these are profit-run companies. But that is why it requires a whole of society approach. So you require policymakers because at the very least, policymakers have a red line that they'll never cross. But when you ask about the private sector, for-profit global conglomerates, and we know 100 companies cause 70% of emissions, then that's where the dynamic is. So I wish there was a policymaker on this panel and we could, really hold them to account. But I'm in solidarity with your comment, and thank you for providing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Any other insights in relation to that question? Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, there's a question in there.
Hi, my name is Jelena Smith-Moore. I'm from the US. And kind of going back to what you were saying before about sort of how when it comes to regenerative farming, like the farmers aren't really thinking about that. I liked how you all have been talking about how it's really important to talk about local farming communities and talk to them before you make policy change. So I guess my question to any of you is just sort of what hopes you have or what insights you might have to what could potentially change to make it so it's more of like a grassroots up sort of thing instead of the trickling down where it's not really effective to the people that are actually being impacted.
So grassroots, how can we incentivize solutions coming from the bottom?
Okay, well, I'll just speak about it from a kind of a policy perspective. So with regards to the strategy specifically, when the African Union was developing the strategy, what it did try to do was have conversations with lots of different stakeholders. And in terms of the farming community, we spoke to quite a few different groupings that represent many farmers. So, for example, we did a lot of consultation with the Southern African SACAL, the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, which represent a huge populace of farmers in the Southern African region. We also had the Pan-African Farmers Organization the head of that commenting directly into the strategy. So from the role of a strategy drafter, for example, it would be trying to have conversations with people and feed their input and needs and priorities directly into a strategy, which then sets a direction for the continent. So the hope is that the strategy then reflects those voices. So in terms, I guess we all have different roles to play depending on the stance that we're taking. But from a strategy drafting perspective, that is the way that we try to highlight some of the needs at the grassroots level. And then obviously we do that for a lot of gender representatives, youth, etc. So across the board.
Go ahead.
I think maybe just the only reflection, and I really would prefer if I think we heard from a farmer on this, but fully respecting your. My only thing, and I hate to kind of hark back on the comment on regenerative agriculture. I think a lot of these communities were already practicing, cultural ways of engaging with. They were living in harmony with nature. And then we have this very extractive economic model that was imported into the continent. So that's the dynamic. There's a clash in that dynamic. But all I can say is that, yes, all stakeholders in anything, not just in food and ag and smallholder farmers and regulations like this, any way you create policy, you have to go to the most lowest level at the stakeholder level and engage them in the core design. For young people, I think this is not new, but young people they want to co-design their future because they will inherit this planet. So in that same way, it's the same with young smallholder farmers. Any policies or any kind of, at the meta level, at the international level, if there's any outcome, a cover decision, COP27 cover decision, their outcomes, their inputs need to shape any of our positions, any of our legislation that we put forth. But that is just a very broad answer, but I really appreciate the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And I think that the process, it's important. So when one has a strategy like this, obviously it's important what it's in there, but the process to get to that text, it's also very fundamental, and it's going to shape the implementation of it. So thank you very much for that, Romy. So I think that we are close to finishing this side event, and it's time for take-home messages from the panelists. So tonight, when I go to my hotel and I talk to my husband, what am I going to tell my husband? So what are the key messages that you want everybody here to remember from the conversation that we just had?
Maybe just one word. Inclusion. That's one word.
Well, that's an unexpected one. I think you'll say, dear husband. Yeah, I was in this conversation where, it's very interesting to see that we have 55 political countries, but they can get united on one topic called climate change, So I think that's really a big way, looking at where the discussion came on climate change. I think that's really something that has come far, that 55 politicians can endorse a document on climate change means that it's entrenched into the continent as an important topic. Yes.
Thank you for that. Stir, take-home message for my husband.
The voice you would take, I think you would just say, farmers outside there are crying so that they can be heard by policymakers and the civil societies at large.
Okay, so I think you should say to your husband, first he should have a look at the African Union strategy so he can read it for his bedtime reading. So, no, it's a joke, but not a joke. It has to be disseminated. We need to a lot of people don't know about this strategy, so we need to have conversations around it and disseminated messages and read it. The first thing. And then second of all, just by the last comment around basically the grassroots question is it's not only around in the drafting process that it's important for inclusion, it's also around in the implementation process. So it's really important at this stage that we identify the roles that each of our stakeholder groupings can play in terms of implementation and accountability and monitoring and evaluation. So I think those frameworks now are really important. So just I think co-design and co-implementation of the strategy is important.
Thank you very much for that, Romy. So my take-home message, and I really like what you say, Jarvi, in the sense that you said we are talking implementation because we have this strategy. So it's really nice to see what the AICCRA team was able to do in partnership with the African Union in order to make this happen. And I want to use this opportunity to congratulate the team because it's amazing what you have been achieved. And more than that, it's amazing because you got us together to discuss these things and to think about a way to move forward in terms of implementing this document. So thank you for that. Thank you for your ideas, insights, responses. It was a very rich conversation. I was really excited of being able to facilitate this discussion. And we have a lot of work ahead of us. So we have the paper, we have the document. Read it, understand it, and implement it. Thank you very much.